If I would have thought we could do 450, I would have proposed 450.
That's $450 million, as in dollars, as in the amount of tax cuts proposed by the Idaho legislature this year. And that was back on February 25th, before the session was over, in a breakfast session with members of the media, when Governor Little was asked about the difference between his first day of the session recommendation of $100 million in tax cuts and what lawmakers eventually settled on, that $450 million. Governor Little told us that morning he wasn't very happy with the bigger number, but he obviously quickly changed his tune, eventually signing those tax cuts into law. In fact, 2 months later, he'd be singing the praises of more than $400 million coming back to taxpayers, saying, quote, "We can afford the $400 million." But then he also said, what about year 2, 3, or 4? That's what concerned him most. Well, maybe those original concerns about affordability were also warranted, because a new report shows Idaho's general revenue collections are below projections by more than $100 million, which led to warnings from the governor's budget office to state agencies: get ready for some cuts, even to education. Others say projections fall short sometimes, but Idaho, well, we're positioned just fine to handle it. Joe Paris spoke to leaders with very different explanations about the numbers and what the governor's office is saying to agencies, again, about those budgets.
A state budget report filed at the end of May shows Idaho's projected revenue collections, money coming into the state, are $141 million below the legislative target. The budget is balanced, but there are concerns from some that the state will soon need to make budget cuts. The projected ending balance for the general fund was about $420 million. It now sits at about $280 million.
There's absolutely no surprise here. We could see back in January that revenue started to take a nosedive. And so now here we are today.
Laura Necochea is the chair of the Idaho Democratic Party. She shares the concern about what these numbers could mean.
The State Tax Commission was estimating back in January that we would see less than 1% growth rate for the coming year. And the legislature decided that they would build a budget on 6.8%, so almost 7 times that growth rate. And that means they spent dollars that we didn't have, including $50 million in subsidies for private schools.
With that reality, she believes budget cuts to important programs are next. The topic of budget cuts was floated at the end of May by the governor's budget chief, writing to agency directors that revenue projections came up short, but there was still time to make up the difference. A task, though, was assigned to the agencies: internally prepare budget holdback scenarios of 2%, 4%, and 6%.
I think they're finally being a little bit honest, at least to the people within state government, about the dire straits we're in.
Year over year, we're still collecting more money than we did last year. There's plenty of money when we end the end of the year. We're in good shape.
Idaho House Speaker Republican Mike Moyle isn't concerned with the numbers, instead pointing to the close to $300 million sitting in reserve.
We've got plenty of money on the bottom line. And remember, think about it. This year, income, for example, is way up. And last year, we cut income taxes. I mean, the economy's doing well. The money is coming in.
But critics say lawmakers just overestimated the projected revenue, and now reality is coming into play.
This is one of the phoniest revenue projections I've seen, and certainly that I saw during my 5 years serving in the legislature. It's very clear that they were monkeying with the math to create this space for a voucher scheme that sends money to private schools and for-profit schools and religious schools and takes money away from places where it's really needed.
That, coupled with the message from the governor's budget chief about cuts, has critics focused on what's next. But Speaker Moyle believes there's a different message to take from this all.
I think that it's wise to put a directive out there and ask, what would you do if you had to, go with a 2% reduction or a 4 or 6? And hopefully they have some good ideas, and hopefully the legislature can expand on that and use that for some tax relief and some school funding.
Lori Wolf, the governor's budget chief, wrote in a statement in part, "We are still seeing year-over-year growth in revenue, signaling a strong Idaho economy. We have made investments into critical priorities while leaving a $400 million cushion on the bottom line to hedge against revenue softening. Idaho also has 22% of general fund revenues in rainy day funds, greater than almost any other state." She continues that as a responsible manager of taxpayer resources, Governor Little is simply preparing for a number of scenarios as they get closer to the end of the fiscal year.
The governor called attention to this back in January. He said the state couldn't afford a huge revenue cut, and then he flip-flopped. He's been flip-flopping like a fish on this issue.
But the facts are, we're collecting more than we did this year, more than we did last year. We don't have any kind of a revenue problem. If anything, we have a spending problem, and this may help us get some of that spending under control. Asking these agencies to tell us what they would do if they had to have 2 or a 4 or 6% holdback gives us an idea of where to look in those budgets in January for where some of the bodies are buried, some of the things that are there that aren't necessary.
And I want to add from Administrator Wolf, she says that while they continue to watch the revenue closely, they feel good about the strength of the state budget and the economy, and they're looking ahead to the future, which includes investments in public education, saying that teacher pay will remain the governor's top priority. Brian, this is also something to keep in mind from Speaker Moyle's perspective, that the month of June, which would be the final go of the fiscal year, that has historically been Idaho's strongest, or one of the strongest months in terms of collecting revenue. So it remains to be seen what the final numbers are, but we already have heard from the critics that they're worried about federal policies and how it's trickling down from the Trump administration.
Yep.
We'll find out, though, I guess, over the next few weeks.
And I guess if these agencies could afford a 2 to 4 to 6% decrease in their budgets, maybe, possibly, they would have done that prior to this, getting this warning that they're not going to have the money they thought they were going to have, this keeping promises plan.
And I know there's also a conversation about digging deeper into the budgets. We heard about this from the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee, Idaho's budgeting committee, that moving forward here in the near future, they're going to start digging into the maintenance budgets, budgets that essentially get a rubber stamp every year, because there are some lawmakers that believe there is waste within the maintenance budget. This could be one activity to try to find that. Critics, though, say that this is just looking for a problem.
All right. Continue to look. All right. Thanks, Joe.